Hi, welcome all of you, and thank you again for joining to another session with Boheco, Bombay Hemp Company, one of the largest company as far as the medical cannabis domain is concerned. And we again welcome Jahan, Siddhant, and Avnish to join us for a very exciting and informative session today. So today the session is very important because this is the basic aspect that what exactly is there in the CBD oil, what exactly there in the product we are using. So all of you, all the doctors, practitioners, students who are joining us will be very curious to know about that. And the team from Boheco will help us today to understand what exactly is there in the bottle which we are prescribing to all the patients. And we are seeing tremendous results in terms of the efficacy of pain management. There are certain other issues in terms of the quality of life related to mental stress, anxiety, insomnia, patients with the CA cases, and so many. The domain is very wide. So, quickly, without wasting much time, I request Jahan, Siddhant, and Avnish to take it forward for today's session. And we are right now just going live. We are right now on Facebook. We'll be live on our website in a minute and on our YouTube channel and Periscope. So, all of you can understand the concepts, can take over the session, and meanwhile, you can post your queries. After the talk, we will be happy to discuss about your queries as well. So Jahan, Siddhant, and Avnish, over to you for the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Piyush. And I think again, very warm welcome from the team at Bohico. And here we're going to be using today to discuss one of the most important parts of working with doctors we have understood as a company and over the experience we have built. Now, this is related mostly to what is in the cannabis oil or the CBD oil or the THC oil or the Vijaya extract that doctors are prescribing today. That we understand THC and CBD are some of the cannabinoids, and in the few sessions ago, we've understood how they help in many ways, with THC having analgesic properties and CBD having anxiolytic and anti-inflammatory properties as well. But is that the only part or only ingredient within the cannabis oil? And that answer is no. There is a lot more in terms of different compounds that exist within the oil that many doctors prescribe today as cannabis and CBD oil. And we thought it's important to help everyone understand what are these components, how are they helpful, what role do they play, and do they have any therapeutic value as well. So the first place to start, in what I'll do is I will start here, and Avnish and Siddhant, you can feel free to come in anytime. Is understand in the flower and the leaf, when you may take the extract or the API at the end of it, what does that completely consist of? Of course, it has cannabinoids like THC and CBD and CBG and CBN, which we will learn about a little more. But it also has other different components. Of the whole amount of the spectrum, the three most important components are cannabinoids, which can be psychoactive like THC and non-psychoactive also, and have very good medical potential. There are terpenes, which are non-psychoactive but give the flavor or aroma to the plant, the flower, the leaf, or the end API. And then there are flavonoids, which again are non-psychoactive but give the pigment or the color and the odor to different cannabis plants as well. Now, what I'll do is I'll pause here and I'll let Avnish and Siddhant start off with some thoughts, and then we will go further into each one of these three areas: cannabinoids, terpenes, and flavonoids.
Definitely. Thank you, John, and thank you, Dr. Juneja, for having us again. So today we're basically going to be explaining or understanding what is specifically present in a cannabinoid formulation, which is available legally in India today. Now, I'd actually like to start from giving you all a bit of a background of what is actually allowed to be prescribed, what is allowed to be actually sold in India, because pure CBD or pure CBD oil on its own as a single active ingredient molecule in a product cannot be sold legally in India today. That is because CBD on its own has not been approved as a food or a medicine. But what the dichotomy of the situation is that owing to our traditional knowledge and our rich heritage of Ayurveda, Unani, Siddha, and all of these other traditional medicines of system, where it's actually documented very well that cannabis and its medical effects are very well understood by these traditional medicines, including Ayurveda, Unani, and Siddha. And what is specifically allowed to be sold today in India is a full spectrum cannabis product, because that is what is actually understood, and that is what is being provided as a Vijaya extract within a formulated Ayurvedic product. So this actually varies a lot from what is available today in the Western world. Within the Western world, you will find terms like broad spectrum, full spectrum, as well as isolated oil. So an isolated CBD oil, like I mentioned, is not available for legally to be sold in India today. Whereas full spectrum cannabis extract formulated in a traditional medicine form, like an Ayurvedic or an Unani or a Siddha traditional system of medicine, is actually allowed to be sold. Now, within this full spectrum, the plethora of compounds that exist, and we mainly consider the actives, that is THC, CBD, along with a few terpenes, that is what we understand as full spectrum. Okay. And from that perspective, THC is the one which everyone understands is the psychoactive component of cannabis and also has certain efficacy towards pain indications. Whereas CBD, which is mainly an anti inflammatory compound, is not psychoactive in its nature. And this is what everyone has been talking about as the silver bullet, which is being today being studied thoroughly in the Western world as well. And there is interest in the Indian geography as well to understand how CBD can really benefit, whether it may be anxiety, whether it may be bringing down the levels of stress that is there, it was existing within the multiple this thing that exists from a corporate point of view, or even just general anxiety that may exist for people. CBD is really helping. But beyond THC and CBD, in a full spectrum extract, you will also have your other compounds, which are like your example, your flavonoids and your terpenes. Terpenes are basically the compounds which add the aroma to the cannabis plant, which is when, so if someone's growing a cannabis plant or is there's an extraction that is done, the terpenes are what impart the smell. Is basically what the understanding is, and then you have your flavonoids, which are basically our flavor or taste imparting compounds, which are basically present in that. Obviously there are a lot of other compounds also exist, for example a chlorophyll, your sugars, etc., those kind of things, but we are mainly going to be focusing on the actives and what actually contributes to that synergistic effect which everyone has been wanting to understand about. Okay. So from that perspective, like I mentioned, CBD, which is our main non-psychoactive component, along with THC, the terpenes, and the flavonoids, are what is giving basically the entourage effect or the synergistic potential of the full spectrum cannabis extract. And this is also what has been understood in our traditional medicine, because our traditional medicine does not recognize just THC or CBD being the active component. It understands that the full spectrum of the cannabis plant is actually important to provide the medical effects in a required domain. So, from that perspective as well, just to give you an understanding, uh, today we have our plants which are collected for making these formulations. Now they have THC as well as CBD as well as our other compounds as well. Now this is what is mainly regarded as a full spectrum extract, and they basically come together to provide the entourage effect. Avnish, if you want to add a couple of points as well.
Yeah, I think as Siddhant was taking us through the specific cannabinoids, flavonoids, terpenes, it's very important to know also that there are other plants also that contain similar chemical entities. For example, most plant extracts that we would look at would have certain terpenes that are giving it that specific smell profile. For example, the word terpene actually is derived from the word pine tree, because we usually have a specific type of a forest smell as we pass a pine tree in some way. The same way we get a specific type of a smell when we're smelling pepper or any of the other specific herbs as well. Flavonoids are also present in other plants, which would probably give us a combination of different flavors. For example, there's a very fruity flavor. There's a very citrusy flavor. There's a flavor that's specifically related to alleviating some kind of pain as well. So all of these different types of chemical entities coming together in various proportions is actually helping a the cannabinoids and the larger molecules also break through the blood brain barrier. It's also the nature of these molecules to kind of become carrier agents for some of the larger molecules. As we know, THC, CBD are relatively larger molecules compared to some of these terpenes as well as flavonoids. Specifically, if we talk about the Indian bhang, we have seen varying proportions of the raw bhang also being that is being formulated into some of these products. Most of the bhang that is coming has relatively higher proportions of THC compared to the proportions of CBD and a whole bunch of other cannabinoids. We have also identified sources of bhang where we are getting standardized 1:1 extracts also of the major compounds. Along with these two major compounds, there are also some of the relatively smaller cannabinoids in quantities, such as CBN, CBG, that are also present as part of the overall extract. And as we are extracting all of these cannabinoids, terpenes from the leaves of the cannabis plant, we also have to be aware that the concentration of these is relatively lower compared to what would come from the bud or the flower of the cannabis plant. Though these cannabinoids structurally would be the same, but due to the lack of concentration, their potency would work in very different ways. So, specifically speaking, the Indian extract so far is a full spectrum extract that's coming from the leaves. Going ahead, we would see a lot of innovation in terms of chemistry that could help us tailor make some of these formulations in terms of their THC CBD concentration, in terms of their ml per mg, the way we administer the ml per mgs, and also their bioavailability going ahead. So I think going ahead, we'll also understand better the role of some of these compounds and also the effect that they have together. I think as Siddhant was also mentioning, the effect of all of these compounds together is something that's known as the entourage effect, which enables the extract to work in a much more wholesome way rather than breaking it down to a single compound itself. And the major reason why this would happen is also because our body, along with having its own endocannabinoid system, also has receptors for all these other terpenes and flavonoids. So when all these different receptor systems are kind of engaging at a similar time period, we see the neuropathic function also kind of kick in, because most of these chemical elements break the blood brain barrier, which is very unusual, as most of the medicine is not actually able to do that very safely. And at the same time, provide the right kind of signaling systems that are passing through the neurotransmitters that help us bind within the body as well. And as we might be aware, the endocannabinoid system is present in so many different parts and systems of the body itself, whether we're looking at the central nervous system or just the epidermis itself, whether it's related to metabolism or whether it's also related to the bones in a certain way. Hence, we're seeing the effect of these cannabinoids working on some kind of osteoarthritis patients who have some musculoskeletal issue, versus it also working on people with some version of neuropathic pain, where we understand that it's related to the central nervous system, and also people who would have some kind of gastric or digestion issues, where they're using the raw bhang powder in a certain form to get rid of their gastric issues as well. So, because the ECS is part of so many subsystems in our body, there's a larger hypothesis being built even in Western medicine, where they're talking about the role of endocannabinoid deficiency being part of certain syndromes. And as we know, syndromes are diseases that yet haven't been categorized from their pathophysiological point of view, and how the disease is kind of unfolded over a few generations itself. And the hypothesis that it's due to some ECS deficiency is becoming much more stronger. For example, I think there are already studies happening with Crohn's disease and a couple of forms of epileptic syndromes, where they've understood that having enough CBD or having enough CBG in one's medical regime would actually help them as well. So I think that's the overall, in a nutshell, what the extract contains and how we want to be able to tailor make this eventually for the right kind of patient population. As of now, we
Absolutely.
have
Mhm.
as of now we have a one size fit all, but going ahead, we do understand the importance of personalized dosing and titration, because each one would have a different reception towards these medicines as well. Yes, John.
Absolutely. So, in line coupling with what Avnish had mentioned, that when we first began the story, we began with cannabinoids like THC and CBD and minor cannabinoids that add to the interesting function of cannabis itself. That there are many cases, for example, where high THC may not have had a good effect on a glaucoma patient because it increases intraocular pressure, for example. But a compound like CBG, that is cannabigerol, that also exists in the same extract but in a lesser quantum, actually decreases intraocular pressure and provides an anti-inflammatory effect. So that is where these minor cannabinoids play a very magical role through the entourage effect, where up to 113 of these different types of cannabinoids have been found and discovered in the plant, in the flower as well as the leaves so far. And with each one comes a unique therapeutic property that it brings along with it. Whether we are talking about CBG, where in 2009 there was an animal study that showed it actually has very good in vivo activity in anti-tumor efficacy, whether we are talking about CBN, where the interesting trivia is the first ever cannabinoid that was isolated was not in fact CBD or THC, it was CBN in 1899, through a non-enzymatic oxidation of THC. And today, CBN is being used as an anticonvulsant, is being looked at for its anti-inflammatory and its anti-MRSA or MRSA potential as well, because of the cytokine storm that it can promote within sort of the biological chamber as well. Whether we're talking CBG or CBN or CBC, which also has shown through different studies it has great properties against neurogenesis and anti-inflammatory nature, it starts to make sense about how cannabis oil is working and why it's working. Not just because of THC and CBD, but because of the accompanying compounds that go with it. And the reason, as Avnish clearly stated out, is because of the fact that these cannabinoid compounds bind to the CB1 and CB2 receptors, which exists within the human ECS or the mammalian endocannabinoid system. That's a cell signaling system that act as neurotransmitters majorly. And because of the function of being a neurotransmitter, of course, they will have important use for the central nervous system, but they also have a harmonizing effect for bone strength, for hormones, for gastrointestinal issues, for muscle strength, and to build your immune system through the on synergistic effect of all of these different types of compounds. And as Avnish and Siddhant mentioned, that was the first category of the truly primary additions into the oil that actually drive therapeutic use. But these are some, and this is the first category of three, where terpenes, as earlier mentioned, that are aromatic molecules and that provide a very unique aroma or smell to the cannabis plant or the cannabis flower, also have very strong relaxing and stress relieving properties, of which there are 100 different versions of these aromatic molecules. And as we spoke about earlier, what is really interesting about each one is whether we are looking, and what we've done is, rather than focusing on all 100, we've taken just the top five most commonly known, and seen how they all exist. And as Avnish and Siddhant mentioned, number one, when we're looking at a terpene like myosin, You can see it's found in mango and basil, in other fruits and other plants. It also has a very earthy and fruity aroma. But what's also interesting about this is that myrcene, which is one of the most common terpenes that is found in most different types of cannabis flower, leaves, extracts, oils, etc., and slowly gets processed out in the entire processing value chain, is that it also has shown that it can rearrange itself into a molecule known as hashishine, which is named because of the abundance or the huge amount of myrcene that is normally present in cannabis resin, or what we call hashish or hash today. And that is what's very interesting about these aromatic compounds, that even though they provide aroma, number one, they also exist in other plants and other fruits, number two. But number three, each one of them has unique therapeutic properties, which are being studied globally in clinical studies and also in many different Asian countries as well. Whether we are saying myrcene, that has very extremely good sedative and analgesic properties, or whether we are talking about limonene, which is the citrus and sort of lemon flavor that would come from the cannabis flower, which is a very common part of how even in America and Europe, the cannabis flower and medical marijuana or medical cannabis market has different types of products that have different scents and aromas, which become a key selling point of them. They can be found in mint or rosemary or juniper, and they also have different uses in food manufacturing, dietary supplements. And because of its nature, all of these compounds like limonene are anti-inflammatory, they alleviate your mood, your stress, they're antibacterial. And this doesn't only stop at one or two like myrcene or limonene, which are the most common terpenes found in cannabis, but even ones like caryophyllene or humulene, which I think Siddhant and Avnish can shed a little light on as well.
Yes. So, as John mentioned, caryophyllene, for example, is found in black pepper, and beta caryophyllene is actually supposed to have strong anti-inflammatory effects. To the tune that few years back, when studying beta caryophyllene, they also understood that beta caryophyllene by itself can also help CBD or other compounds uh, improve their effects, because beta caryophyllene itself also does bind to a couple of receptors within the human body, one of them being also the CB2 receptor. Now, from that perspective, we understand that CB2 receptor, when activated, creates anti inflammatory effects as a downstreaming process. Now, from that perspective, a terpene like beta caryophyllene could be very important in a formulation where we are looking for strong anti inflammatory effects. Now, this, as mentioned by Jahan and Avnish, these terpenes, and there are thousands of these terpenes. There are monoterpenes, and there are sesquiterpenes, and there are triterpenes of multiple kinds, and they're extremely volatile compounds. So, the processing of the product has to be in a certain way where these compounds are actually not lost. And that is what our main focus is in our product as well, to create a full spectrum product. We do understand that low temperature processing, etc., is extremely important to maintain these minute but very significant compounds in our formulations, so that the entourage effect can be seen in a stronger fashion. Just like that, as explained like caryophyllene, we also have humulene. Now, humulene is mainly found in the hops plant, but beyond the hops plant, you also find them in other plants, just like coriander, basil, clove, etc. Now, the point is that if I had to just explain to you how this works, or the whole terpenes, uh, just imagine an equalizer bar. In an equalizer bar, you have multiple hertz which you are adjusting: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So now imagine you have 10 different terpenes, and their adjustment at certain levels is what creates that kind of smell profile. But these compounds exist in all plants, or in most plants, so to speak. So the point is that when these compounds are secreted in a certain manner in certain plants, that is what gives it that aroma profile. But humulene, limonene, myrcene, humulene, etc., exist in a lot of plants. So that we understand that these compounds also do have that kind of beneficial effect. And when combined with cannabinoids, which happens in a full spectrum product, there is, I mean, you can say 2 plus 2 is actually equal to 5. from that perspective. And that is really what we are trying to create. And this is also what was identified from our Ayurvedic preparations thousands of years back, which is the reason why we are creating our products in the same fashion as what is described in these Ayurvedic literatures and texts. So that's the basic understanding that we have. Yes, Avnish.
And
Sorry, John. Yes.
Yeah, I think
yeah,
John,
no,
go
I
on,
think
please.
yes. So now I'm saying I think this also will provide the viewers with the perspective of why so many different fruits, why so many different items like cloves or cinnamon or black pepper or basil have such beneficial properties themselves as well. Majorly because of these components that exist across the entire value chain, naturally existing within so many different fruits or plants or vegetables, that they themselves have inherent properties for and against inflammation or bacteria or fungus or stimulating your bones or improving your strength or reducing anxiety. And that is a major fundamental behind which the Ayurvedic principles of capturing so many of these different items in many different references and formulations actually starts to link together in modern day science and begin to make sense by uh, forming a bridge between the ancient sciences and the understanding and the modern science understanding of such compounds that exist within. And I think the final element or the final third category that we'd like to share with everyone today is the category of flavonoids, which is something we briefly spoke about earlier. That flavonoids are basically phytonutrients, about 20 plus or so, that are synthesized through the phenylpropanoid pathway and are responsible for the color, that is the pigment of the plant, and the odor or the flavor of the cannabis flower or the plant or the leaf. Now, there are flavonoids that exist only in the cannabis plant, and there are flavonoids that exist in many other plants. For example, you have in anthocyanins, you exist in black currants or blackberries, or apigenins exist in celery or parsley, depending upon the pigment or the color. There are also similar flavonoids like canaflavin A and B, which we'll discuss a bit more right now, that exist only within the cannabis flower and the leaf. Now, the along with adding the pigment and the color, each one of these flavonoids amongst the 20 plus have unique properties and unique therapeutic use. The first category and the most important for cannabis are canaflavin A and B, which have are sort of prenyl flavonoids and are known for their anti-inflammatory properties, majorly focused around inhibiting the prostaglandin E2 production in vitro. The basic observation from a lot of the studies is the anti-inflammatory nature of these two flavonoids, just canaflavin A and canaflavin B, is almost 30 times more powerful than a regular aspirin, which is very, very significant and would be helping understand where the pain relieving or the analgesic nature of this oil that is prescribed starts to come in as well. What I'll do is I'll pause here and I'll also allow Avnish and Siddhant to share a few more thoughts about the therapeutic properties and nature of some of these flavonoids as well.
Yes. Sorry. So, with respect to canaflavin A and B, as mentioned by Jahan, these are flavonoids which are specifically only found within the cannabis plant. And as mentioned, they do have quite strong anti-inflammatory properties as well. Now, as a matter of fact, within the Western world, I believe in a certain part of Europe, they are actually trying to isolate these compounds to understand what is the standalone potential of a canaflavin A or a canaflavin B. This is because, as you understand, cannabis is a very extremely understudied plant. Now, over a period of the last 5 to 10 years, there has been reinvigorated interest to study the compounds that exist in the cannabis plant. For example, back in the day, we were studying only a THC or only a CBD, which was the main actives which were understood. But now, over a period of time, we understand that there is CBN, which is cannabinol, which can potentially help with sleep. Or beyond that, we also have a CBG, which is cannabigerol, which has some kind of anti-epileptic effects. But these have not been studied, unfortunately, as much. And from that perspective, if you have to make a standalone product, which would mainly be under a pharmaceutical domain or otherwise, it will have to be studied thoroughly first in a preclinical domain, and then have to go towards a complete clinical trial for to understand the safety and efficacy when it is standalone from that perspective. But as compared to that, when we have our flavonoids are well understood to be non-toxic from that perspective, and they, I believe, will have a even larger potential, even from a perspective of going towards some kind of a nutraceutical development or something like that, which can, basically showcase an anti-inflammatory effect from that perspective. uh, any other thoughts if you have, Avnish?
Yeah, I think one thing would be nice to mention is that some of these flavonoids and terpenes are present in very, very minute quantities. And hence we do not find them as a very standard thing in all the possible cannabis extracts that are there. And as this has also got a lot to do with the genetic outlook of the plant in terms of what is present in the plant, as far as its cannabinoid, flavonoid, or terpene content is concerned. And even at very, very small and minute quantities, they have showcased very positive effects as far as its therapeutic potential is concerned. And as far as the overall chemistry of the cannabis plant and the cannabis extract is concerned, we've just kind of scratched the surface. As we saw, at the start of the presentation, there are more than 119 cannabinoids that are actually so far been identified and standardized for testing. Going ahead, we'd see a lot of these cannabinoids also coming out with a lot of different therapeutic potential. And the key is going to be in what proportion and concentration are these different cannabinoids working together, specifically for something as serious as cancer or something as serious as any other chronic disease in that case, and how they could also help in patients getting a lot more out of the medicine eventually. So I think what we've been
Absolutely.
able to do is encapsulate the chemistry of cannabis from an Ayurvedic perspective, modernizing it a little bit in terms of where the world is at and what role eventually the Indian form of traditional medicine will have, complementing the Western form in this case. Please go on, John.
Exactly. Absolutely. I think that's a perfect concluding thought. And I think just on the absolute final note, before we conclude from this brief presentation from our side, is to be able to provide many Indian Ayurvedic doctors and allopathic doctors and practitioners with a context of the materials that exist, even in trace amounts within what they prescribe, they dispense, to help them understand how these are A, non psychoactive, how B, these are responsible for certain characteristics, whether flavor, whether odor, whether pigment, and how C, these are commonly found amongst other fruits, other vegetables, and other, I would say, commonly consumed items within our kitchens and our households. And finally, D, how each one of these minor elements, whether cannabinoids, whether terpenes, whether flavonoids, combine in their entourage, whether cannabinoids combine in their entourage effect, or whether have a synergistic effect with terpenes or flavonoids for different therapeutic and medical uses of the cannabis plant and the extract. And that is the major reason and logic why we find it being useful for patients with pain, patients with different type of seizure conditions, stress conditions, new indication areas, as well as time and tide interested old terminal illness areas. And now, gradually, with A plus B plus C, that is cannabinoids plus terpenes plus flavonoids, the entire puzzle of how cannabis oil works, we hope, begins to make sense and unravel for all doctors watching. Uh, I think thank you so much from our side for your time as well.
Right. Thank you, Jahan, Avnish, and Siddhant. I think this is one of the best session in terms of the ingredients and the exact structure of all these contents are concerned. There are quick few questions which we want to discuss with you. First of all, I congratulate all of you to have this kind of knowledge, which is very much essential for this particular domain. And again, we will be further taking it up, and we'll be discussing more specifically, maybe we can have a dedicated session. There are some questions which are pouring in, and request all the people who are watching us live right now, they can quickly post some questions. We have already few queries, so let's discuss quickly, and any one of you wants to answer. So the first question is, as far as these ingredients and these various compounds are concerned, if we talk about full spectrum and if we talk about broad spectrum, as much I know, full spectrum will have definitely most of them, but specifically as far as broad spectrum is concerned, so the question is difference between full and broad spectrum regarding these ingredients. So what will be there in the broad spectrum, what will not be there in the broad spectrum? So maybe if any one of you can elaborate on, clarify on those aspects.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Dr. Janeja. So, just to give you a base understanding of what's happening is that there is a lot of overlap within nomenclatures from different geographies. For example, in Canada, they're called a little different. In the US, they're called a little different. But the one standard thing that we follow and that we understand is that a full spectrum product will contain THC, will contain CBD, and will contain all the other compounds as well, including minor cannabinoids and terpenes. From that perspective, a broad spectrum product will not contain THC or will contain THC at an extremely negligible level, but it will have CBD and it will have all the other compounds as well. And then we have, like I mentioned, a simple isolate oil, which is basically a CBD oil, which is made only from CBD isolate. So that will only have CBD as the main active compound in that. And along with that, it'll be a simple carrier agent or an excipient, which will basically. So these are the three broad categories that we have. Like I mentioned, full spectrum will have THC, broad spectrum will not have THC or will have at a very negligible level. And then we have an isolated product. So that is the basic difference.
Right, great, great, and thank you so much for this clarification. Another question is mode of action of cannabis oil. So there are various answers to this, Dr. Rakesh. There are various mode of actions as far as my understanding is concerned. But definitely, rather than me speaking, I would like to hear from the panelists today. So each one of you can maybe define at least one or two mode of action. Any one of you is who is comfortable. So maybe you can clarify. So accordingly, we can maybe have some more additional aspects from all of you.
Definitely, definitely. So, for mode of action of cannabis oil, now please understand that there are multiple receptor systems that get involved as compared to a basic pharmaceutical medicine, which will have a single molecule which goes and binds to a single receptor system and then will have, downstream effects. As compared to that, cannabis oil, as mentioned, basically will have a plethora of compounds which, when are taken inside your body, are then going and binding to these multiple receptor systems, right? So, for example, you have your CB1, CB2 receptor systems, but beyond that, which are your main cannabis receptor systems. But there are also other receptor systems. For example, if I had to just give you an example, it is GPR55. Now, we know GPR55 is an off receptor. Okay, it is not understood completely its action or what it's supposed to do, but it has been understood that certain carcinogenic compounds, which obviously create cancer, are the ones that go and bind to the GPR55 receptor, and then there is there is a tumor formation or there is a cancer formation from that perspective. But as compared to that, when you have a cannabis molecule going and binding to the GPR55 receptor, it is actually exhibiting anti-cancer effects, or it is basically blocking off the receptor. So this actually mechanism has not been deeply understood, like I explained to you, because cannabis has not been available for research for a multiple amount of years, and now that it is, there is these kind of projects which are being initiated globally, where we are also trying to understand, what is that critical thing that is making a difference from that perspective. And the mode of action of cannabis oil is quite complicated. We are also trying to understand from that perspective what it does. But if I had to give you a proper example of what exists today, for example, a product like Sativex. Sativex is basically a mixture of THC and CBD, which is an oral spray for managing spasticity with MS. Now, we can specifically say that in case of this spasticity with MS, these molecules are going and binding to your CB1 receptor, where they're actually activating the receptor in such a way to reduce your neuropathic pain. And that is specifically what I would say is the mode of action for a compound or a product like Sativex. But as compared to our product, which has a full spectrum, and Sativex is not full spectrum as compared to ours, the modes of action and the multiple receptor systems that may be involved, like your TRPVs or your TRPAs, there are many receptor systems which are actually involved, and this is something that does not unfortunately exist today because like I said, it's not been studied so far. It would be very interesting to understand what actually does happen from that perspective, where you have a full maybe 5 or 10 main important compounds of cannabis, and what are the receptor systems that they are activating, and how together they are giving a conjoined synergistic effect. Now, that I believe would be a very important study going forward in the future, and hopefully, if you can study it from an Ayurvedic perspective, which actually understands the formulations being made in a certain way, so that there are no side effects and all from that perspective. So that I believe will be extremely important to go forward and study.
Right, absolutely, and definitely we are looking forward for that aspect. Dr. Namrita Reddy, I think she is already using maybe she's using some product from Boheco, and
Yes.
she has
Yes.
mentioned that I use skin healthcare, and that was instant relief. Now I've given arthritis pain. So thank you so much again, Dr. Namrita, for this feedback. These kind of feedbacks help, and people like you are very much required to take it forward. And very important question, Dr. Rakesh has mentioned. Let me hear from all of you, and then maybe I will add on my inputs and whatever the experience I have as far as contraindications or some issues which are there. Or maybe let me start this, and maybe then all of you can give your inputs. See, as far as cannabis oil is concerned, Dr. Rakesh, one thing I want to clarify here is very important thing, by the way. All the practitioners, all the doctors, I request all of you, please. The first thing is the dosage. Dosage is very important. It's not it's not related to the contraindication, but yes, if you are prescribing a wrong dose, it can reflect in any patient and with issues, because this is a very sensitive herb. On one side, it is one of the safest in terms of the administration we are doing in various indications, but on the other side, the dosage should be very specific, and there are mechanisms to calculate the dose. So that is one first point which I want to clarify, and I want to put it here. Is second is, see, whenever somebody is starting, we need to understand the potency of CBD oil or cannabis oil which we are using, whether it is a broad spectrum or full spectrum, and if it is a full spectrum, that how much THC and all these potencies should be, like we need to read that, and accordingly, as a practitioner, we need to recommend, and we need to say that if somebody is starting initially for the first time in his or her life, then yes, for at least some time initially, they have to adopt, the body need to adopt the thing, and it is applicable to all other drugs also. There are so many other drugs in allopathic or Ayurveda and any other system of medicines, where we ask them to avoid heavy work, to avoid driving, to avoid alcohol, and these kind of aspects are there, which are there with cannabis and CBD as well. Otherwise, if you say contraindications, till now there is no as such, but yes, in pregnancy, in lactation, and these kind of stages, definitely we try to avoid, because there are some more research studies and some more like technicalities are required. And yes, under the age of 21, if any kid or child required, so it will has to be in the parental supervision. Apart from the many other thing you want to add, maybe Jahan or
I
Siddhant, you
think
can.
absolutely. No, absolutely. I think Dr. Piyush, you have hit the nail on the head. The most important is moderation of dosage. Reason being, most of, if not almost all of the licensed canna relief consumption ingestion leaf-based ingestion products are full spectrum. They contain one as one component of THC to one component of CBD, and that's where understanding how much milligram of THC is going to the patient or CBD is going to the patient in how many drops is key, because THC is psychoactive. It does have certain side effects. Now, I would say they are considered side effects for some, but they would be considered symptomatic management for others. For example, in terms of dosage, if there is too much of dosage of THC, there is always a risk of dizziness
Well,
or extra hunger or fatigue, or impaired motor function that can come along, lethargy that can set in after a certain dosage as required. And that's why it's important when beginning with dosage, it's important to start with 2 to 4 drops or 4 to 6 drops, depending upon the genetic preconditions of the patient and of course the terminal indication. And as Dr. Piyush mentioned, every 3 to 5 days dosage must be considered for titration upwards, on a 2 to 4 drop basis, because the bioavailability of consuming drops is very high. So the body gets accustomed to this within 72 hours to about 120 hours. Within that time span, the body builds a resistance. So to be able to beat that resistance and to meet your symptom management, whether it's for mood, whether for sleep, whether for appetite, whether for pain, whether for nausea, it's important to begin looking at titration on a 5 to 7 day basis, or a 3 to 5 day basis, upon first administration. That being said, there are the side effects as mentioned, that if there is too much of drops, yeah, a patient may feel dizzy, they may feel a tiny bit nauseous, they may feel very sleepy and lethargic, there may be a little bit of motor impairment, and a bit of joint pain that might come about. And that's why, as Dr. Piyush mentioned, it's important to keep in mind these contraindications and be able to align them with the indications being treated by the doctor, and whether some of these contraindications are actually symptom management for the patients of the indication area for the doctor as well. So that is just a perspective that we have built, with working with a few hundred patients. Maybe Avnish, you have some thoughts also?
Yeah, I think one of the major points, as Jahan mentioned, in science, usually we have an effect. There is no ill effect or good effect. The effect might be desired by some and might not be desired by some. So, for example, somebody who is actually going through a very, very chronic disease would require a relatively higher dose of THC for them to be able to A, instill that kind of hunger, B, get a little bit of that sleep, and that feeling of being able to fall asleep as well. Whereas for somebody who is not desiring those effects, it might be a side effect for them. The same way, as Jahan mentioned, it's very much related to titrating the dose and starting slow and going low, is kind of the objective. And I mean, starting low and going slow is the objective, but going upwards eventually in terms of what they could be consuming as per their body weight, sex, age, etc. But I think science has already established multiple contraindications, which I think the panelists have already well elucidated. And going forward, one must realize that cannabis does affect the neurotransmitter system. It does affect the neurosystem, which means one has to be a little careful when they are dealing with something that would be considered as heavy machinery. Definitely keep away from driving. I think even states in the US where there are medical cannabis and recreational cannabis laws, the cognitive behavior and the cognitive tests are up and coming in terms of, is there an effect, negative effect on the cognitive ability once somebody's consumed X milligrams of THC or CBD. So from a neuropsychiatric point of view, also we're seeing more research come out, and definitely there's going to be much more sophisticated protocols to deal with contraindications on a psychiatric side or a biological side from that perspective.
Yes.
Absolutely,
Sorry,
absolutely. And on the
one
same
point I
note,
also
yeah, yes,
sorry,
Siddhant.
I just want to add one last point as well, with
Yes, yes.
respect to contraindications. So one of the contraindications which I believe should be mentioned is also with respect to the blood pressure system. So which we have understood is that cannabis, when taken, for example, if you are taking a full spectrum product which has a certain high amount of THC, now this is extremely desired for a person who is suffering from excruciating pain because of a condition, for example, like cancer. Now, in that case, a high dose of THC would actually be recommended from that perspective. But if somebody else who is basically not having that kind of excruciating pain takes that full spectrum cannabis product, it's going to create tachycardia, which is basically it's going to elevate the heart rate. Now, what happens is, in for example, people who are below the age of 50 will not have much of a concern with a tachycardia. They may feel like, okay, I am my heart is rushing, etc. There is something that's happening. But for older people, people who above the age of 60, a tachycardia would actually be a kind of a concern for a doctor to recommend something like that. So from that perspective, blood pressure should definitely be, if someone is having a blood pressure issue and wants cannabis based products, then I believe that from a doctor's perspective, it would be very important for them to obtain feedback on the blood pressure readings, as well as, keep checking the blood pressure after taking these cannabis based medicine, because that would be very important. We know, this has also been recommended in the US, the people who have low blood pressure based issues, for them, sometimes cannabis based medicines are not recommended. But that is because of XYZ different reasons as well. Obviously, you have to understand the whole history of the patient, and what are the kind of medicines he's already taking, for drug interactions understanding. So these are the kind of important things that should be kept in mind to before or while giving cannabis based medicines to your patients.
See, the point which I want to convey here is to all the people who are listening to us. See, you need to be very, very clear. We are dealing with a medicine. Technically, it's a medicine if you are dealing with a full spectrum or a broad spectrum CBD oil. If you are dealing with hemp seed oil or hemp seeds or hemp powder, that is a product, food product, which is fine. You can take. It's one of the best superfood. So that differentiation you need to understand. Second is, if we talk about any medicines in this world, in this pharmaceutical world or medical world, be it any pathy, there is a simple rule of risk and benefit. So when we judge anything on the ratio of what are the risks and what are the benefits, that we need to understand. So as a practitioner, as a doctor, and people who are listening to us right now, I can vouch, with sitting with thousands of patients data, that definitely the benefits are far more as far as any potential risk or any potential, and if we compare with the available options, so we have another options, another chemical agents or compounds, and if we compare to those compounds and cannabis, the risks are very, very less as far as cannabis is concerned. Yes, there are certain precautions which already panelist has mentioned, which you all need to understand. There is a very sensitive aspect in terms of the dosage is concerned, but if you follow the fundamentals and if you go through the entire training and entire exposure, how to prescribe, how to take it forward as far as the medical cannabis practice is concerned, one thing we can vouch is the benefits are far more as far as the risk is concerned, and people in fact are right now being more educated about their issues, about their health issues, and they want to withdraw from the side effects of whatever the existing chemical compounds they are taking, especially if you talk about pain, if you talk about side effects of chemotherapy, if you talk about so many aspects I have seen day in and day out in our OPDs and all. So the benefits are far more like there. And but if you are using it sensibly, and if you are asking them, and if you are guiding them, whatever the potential aspects are concerned in terms of some cautious aspects which you need to take forward when if somebody is taking cannabis, I think that will be fine. And accordingly, people are sensible these days, and if you guide them, they will definitely follow you. And that is the only thing which we need to understand. But yes, more and more research and more data will be generated, and I think Bombay Hemp Company is already doing certain research projects, and we'll be looking forward to get more and more information on all those aspects. And we will be coming up with more and more informative sessions in future. We will be definitely need to talk more on dosage. There is a huge demand, so we'll be coming up that again. We'll be coming up with a detailed session on dosage, and also we request Boheko to maybe get some more practitioners and doctors also. We had a few sessions in past as well with the practitioner who are working with Boheko, and in future also will be coming up with that. So on that note, thank you again
Definitely.
all of you for joining us, and thank you Jahan, Siddhant, and Avnish for joining us today. Very well created session, I can say. I will definitely rewind this session and go through the entire slides, because you people have beautifully created the entire portfolio. I remember my day of certification when I was doing that, and I read all these things. And in our questionnaire, it has been asked about the terpenes, about the flavonoids, about the active ingredients and all the names, and so many things were there. So thank you so much for giving us all this information today, and looking forward to have many more sessions with Boheko and the entire team. And have a great week ahead to all of you. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Piyush.
Thank you so much, Dr.
Thank you, Dr. Piyush. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.